Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silvermont, and that's not a pre-canned introduction, I say that every time. And this is my review of Total War Warhammer 2, which I own on Steam. I bought the game with my own money as I'm curious about both the Warhammer and Total War franchises. Now I consider myself a entry fan on the former. If you don't know what Total War is, well, it's a sort of strategy game with real-time battles between armies. If you've played Mount & Blade, it's a little like that in some ways. Although perhaps that's a strange comparison, as I'm sure a lot more people have played Total War than Mount & Blade. Incidentally, that's Mount and Blade, not Mountain Blade. In effect though, Total War Warhammer 2, the game is split between campaign management and real-time battles. During campaign management, each faction has a turn. During that turn they can move their heroes around the world map, recruit units, construct buildings, negotiate with other factions, and so forth. During battles, which can be automated, skipped, and fast-forwarded, you'll give commands to your units and control them from a top-down view and then watch the carnage. You can flank with cavalry, lay an ambush in a forest, and cut down the enemy from afar with artillery, as well as creating choke points with your infantry and so on and so forth. The game's real strength and appeal for me, and I imagine a lot of people, lies in the characters of each faction. If you own the first Total War Warhammer as well, then you unlock the Mortal Empires campaign, which is more of a sandbox mode, compared to 2's Vortex campaign, which has a more structured goal. In effect, each faction in Vortex has their own goal. The High Elves must gather items for rituals to bolster the Vortex, a giant magical tornado that does very good things for the stuff that needs to be done. Whereas in Mortal Empires, the goal is more just to conquer everyone else. And in Mortal Empires you have access to all of the existing factions. The Empire of Man, High Elves, Dwarves, Orcs, Lizardmen, Dark Elves, Skaven, and so on. Everyone is like to have their own favourite faction and a favourite legendary lord they'll control within that faction. For me, I'm all about the Tomb Kings, or the Dwarves, as I like dwarves and I like skeletons in RPG fantasy games. Whilst most factions have equivalent units to others, such as everyone having some sort of archers or speedy units like horsemen, there are enough differences to make them all feel more than merely reskins of the other, even down to having their own user interface and race-specific mechanics and research trees. The Tomb Kings, for example, do not have unit upkeep. You do not have to pay for every unit. They are free to recruit and free to maintain. But on the flip side, you are limited in how many of specific units you can have. Whereas the High Elves could have an army full of dragons, it would be prohibitively expensive, but they could do it. Whereas the Tomb Kings are limited on the number of their strong units by their buildings. And their buildings are absurdly expensive to build, to construct. In terms of performance though, the game's optimization is far from perfect. I experienced fluctuating frame rates on just about anything above medium. This is probably down to the fact that the game has huge battles with hundreds or thousands of units all milling about on screen at the same time during these large-scale battles. Beyond that, the game's loading times are absolutely atrocious. When it comes to PC games, I would usually say an SSD is a nice optional extra. For this game, it feels mandatory. Installing this game on my hard drive meant the loading times were awfully long, in what felt like minutes at a time. That's every time you load a battle, then load back to the campaign map. So you're going to be sitting around for like an hour of loading, and if you're playing for a few hours it feels like. To compound the issue, the game doesn't really have a good borderless windowed mode. You basically have to play in a rubbish window or full screen, so you can't really like alt-tab and look at other stuff whilst you're loading. These two issues are not good. I've also heard that the end of round moments where each faction makes all their moves can be very slow, which I think is some sort of CPU issue. Personally, I didn't experience anything like that. But unless the game's installed on my SSD, load times are utterly unacceptable. So if you don't have an SSD, it would be really hard to recommend this game. It's that big of an issue for me. I don't want to sit around for like 3 minutes after every battle and like a minute before the battle, you know? Maybe it's not 3 minutes, but it feels like that. It's really, really long. The graphics themselves are nice. To some extent you can forgive these performance problems when you're able to float above the battlefield, then zoom all the way in to see an individual lizard man picking up a Skaven and obliterating it, you know? It's a hard game to review because when do you consider the game finished? When you've beaten the campaign once with every faction? Just once in general? In terms of playtime, even a single campaign can last many hours, so this is definitely the sort of game you can get hundreds and hundreds of hours from if it appeals to you. It's a few years old too at this point, you're probably aware, but it still gets regular updates and support from the developers, which is always what we want to see. I do think it's a bit strange how you need to, ideally, have the first game as well to make the most out of the second. I feel like the second game should just come with all the factions from the first. Still, being rewarded for owning the first game is nice, but the fact that the second game exists at all is odd. Couldn't it have just been a DLC, a big expansion for the first game? Before I end the review, I'll point out that the game has co-op campaigns with a few caveats. In Vortex, you'll have to play the same faction, whereas in Mortal Empires, you can play different ones. Sadly, it's only 2-player as well. There's some versus mode as well, I think, but I have zero interest in that, so I've not looked at it at all. Finally, the game has mod support, which is always a big plus. Steam Workshop is a great thing, and I love to see it integrated into games. Painless modding done with the click of a button, allowing you to enhance and customize your experience to your own liking. But yeah, that about does it. Total War, Warhammer 2. Fun game for a casual Warhammer fan such as myself, who knows very little about the world and the lore, but enjoys the different races who are all ridiculous in a good way. I'd love to see more good games in the Warhammer fantasy setting. They are few and far between, sadly. I do wish this game had a few more Mount and Blade style features though, such as being able to explore the cities on foot, having direct control of your legendary lord in third-person combat too. That's just me though. Hope you found this video entertaining or useful, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching. Ciao.